The unexpected meeting. Snow fell softly over the city, coating Knoxville in a quiet white blanket. I cursed under my breath as my old Honda coughed and wheezed its last breath 3 blocks from the Riverside Convention Center, fashionably late again. I tugged my second-hand black dress tighter around my shoulders, praying the hem wouldn't catch on my worn heels. Tonight wasn't about me, though. It was about the 37 animals relying on the fundraiser to survive the winter. Crystal chandeliers sparkled over women in designer gowns and men in crisp tuxedos. I stuck out like a sore thumb, a small, trembling presence amid the grandeur. My heart pounded as I pushed through the crowd, clutching the folder with my speech. Animal shelters weren't glamorous. They weren't meant to be, but they mattered, and tonight I hoped someone would care enough to help. A warm voice cut through my panic. "You must be Eden Barnes." I turned to see a man with silver hair and kind eyes. "Mayor Richardson," I said, bowing slightly. "Thank you for having me. I hope I can do justice to our cause tonight." He smiled. "Your proposal was impressive. You have a way of making people care." Through the crowd, music began. A symphony orchestra rose on the stage, and my nerves faded as I watched the conductor move. Her elegance was effortless, her hair catching the golden lights as she guided the musicians with precise, fluid gestures. The mayor leaned toward me. "That's Alyssa Lewis, best conductor this city's ever seen. Comes from old money but has a heart for charity." Our eyes met briefly across the room. Electric, intense, recognition more than attraction. Then it was my turn. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eden Barnes from the Knoxville Animal Protection Society." I stepped into the spotlight, trembling but determined. I spoke of Luna, the pregnant dog we found abandoned, of Max, the one-eyed shepherd guarding the little ones, and Whiskers, the comforting tabby cat. I described their struggles, the nights I'd spent worrying, and the hope we carried. Every word came from the heart. Silence, then a clear voice. $100,000. Gasps echoed around me. I shielded my eyes. She stood there, calm and poised, the conductor, Alyssa Lewis. "For the animals," she said simply. I blinked, overwhelmed. The animals, Luna, Max, Whiskers, all had a chance now. And something deeper shifted inside me. Not attraction exactly, but awe. She had seen me truly beyond my second-hand dress, beyond the humble shelter. A visit that changed everything. 2 days after the gala, a sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the gravel parking lot of the Knoxville Animal Protection Society. Through the chain-link fence, I saw her step out, tall and elegant, the kind of presence that seemed almost out of place among the muddy paths and barking dogs. Alyssa Lewis, the conductor who had so effortlessly captivated me at the gala, was here in person. Her expensive heels sank slightly into the soft earth, but she moved with the grace of someone used to commanding attention, even in the most unlikely of places. Her blue eyes met mine as I approached, and for a moment I felt that same spark of recognition, that quiet connection we had shared from across the ballroom. "Miss Barnes," she said softly, her voice refined but warm. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced." My heart fluttered at the tone in her voice, a mixture of curiosity and genuine care. "Of course not. You saved us. Would you like a tour?" I asked, brushing dog food from my hands onto my apron as we walked through the kennels. She followed, kneeling without hesitation to greet Max, who limped toward her, tail wagging despite his missing eye. "Hello, handsome," she murmured, her fingers tracing the rough fur of his shoulder with surprising tenderness. There was a quiet awe in her demeanor, a sincerity that contrasted sharply with the glamorous, controlled woman I had only seen on stage. "You remembered him," I said softly, surprised by the depth of her memory. "I remember everything about your speech," she replied, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. We moved from kennel to kennel, and I explained the stories of each animal, the struggles and small victories that defined our work. She listened intently, occasionally reaching out to stroke a dog or comfort a frightened cat, her actions reflecting a deep empathy that no amount of money or privilege could buy. I realized then that Alyssa and I were mirrors in different worlds, both fixers, both desperate to make a difference, but with vastly different tools. I fixed with my hands, my sweat, my heart, while she fixed with wealth, influence, and resources that could make impossible things happen. After the tour, she asked if I had time for coffee, and without thinking, I said yes. Hours slipped by at a tiny corner diner, laughter filling the space as I told her of Whisker's latest escape attempts and of Max's protective instincts over the smaller dogs. Her stories of growing up in boarding schools, of music lessons chosen for her by adoptive parents, painted a portrait of a life filled with precision, expectation, and emotional loneliness. We found common ground in the solitude that came with being self-reliant, orphaned in different ways, surviving in our own forms. By the time we parted, the world outside seemed smaller, less daunting, and more like a place where two souls could quietly recognize each other, despite differences in wealth, background, and circumstance. Boundaries and confessions. Our next encounter was at her penthouse, overlooking the city lights that shimmered like distant stars. The invitation came as a phone call, warm and tentative, a glimpse of vulnerability in someone usually commanding and controlled. Dinner was casual, intimate, the kind of setting that stripped away status, money, and public image. Alyssa poured wine with care, her fingers brushing mine briefly, sending sparks up my arm. Conversation flowed naturally, faster, and more freely than I had anticipated. We shared stories of childhood, of ambition, of loneliness, and of dreams that had never truly belonged to us. I found myself studying her in the soft light of her living room, noticing the way her aristocratic features softened when she laughed, the depth of her blue eyes reflecting both pain and hope. Then suddenly she grew serious. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My heartbeat skipped. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," she admitted. Confusion and warmth battled inside me. "What way?" I asked, my voice uncertain. Instead of answering directly, she moved closer, her hand finding mine, interlacing fingers in a gesture so intimate, and yet so natural it took my breath away. The air between us was heavy with unspoken truths, with possibilities that neither of us could fully articulate. She confessed that I had been on her mind since the gala, a revelation that sent a shiver through me. I responded in kind, sharing the shock of encountering someone who could see past my modest exterior to the determination and care that defined me. We kissed, softly at first, then with growing intensity, tasting a future that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Yet, as the city lights flickered below, reality intruded. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from Diana, her manager, reminding her of obligations, of the structure, of the rigid world she could not escape. The warmth of our moment contrasted sharply with the cold boundaries of her professional life. I realized that Alyssa's world was filled with people and expectations who would never truly understand the connection forming between us. And yet, despite all warnings and obstacles, I could not turn away. There was a raw honesty in her touch, in her voice, in the way she saw me, not as a charity case, not as a fleeting fascination, but as someone indispensable, as if our meeting had been orchestrated by fate itself. It was intoxicating, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The warning. The morning after our penthouse dinner, a sharp knock jolted me awake. Peering through the peephole, I saw a woman whose presence radiated authority and calculation, silver hair pulled back tightly, an expensive tailored suit that marked her as someone used to control. Diana Lewis, Alyssa's manager, stepped in without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes scanned my modest apartment, assessing, judging, cataloging every detail as if trying to determine whether I belonged in Alyssa's world. "Miss Barnes," she said, perching on the edge of my couch like a hawk, "we need to discuss your relationship with my client." Her tone carried a subtle but undeniable threat, the kind that made me shrink instinctively. She spoke of Alyssa's career, the delicate web of public appearances, donors, and board expectations that dictated her every move. According to Diana, my presence, my humble background, my messy real life, posed a risk to Alyssa, a potential scandal that could undo everything she had worked for. Then came the ultimate test of my resolve. A checkbook opened, figures written in neat black ink, 50,000, 100, even more. She wanted to buy my silence, my departure, my removal from Alyssa's orbit. Anger flared inside me, a combination of disbelief and indignation. Did she really think that love, connection, or recognition could be bought? Diana's eyes were steely as she waited for an answer. My chest tightened, but I refused. Money had never defined me, and it would not define my choices now. Her warning lingered in my mind long after she left, echoing against the walls of my apartment. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps Alyssa's world was one I would never truly fit into. But then I remembered her touch at the shelter, the vulnerability in her eyes that night at the diner, the warmth that had chased away the cold boundaries of her perfectly controlled life. Some things could not be dictated by wealth or status. Some connections were real, unbought, and irreplaceable. The secret revealed. Over the next week, I noticed subtle changes in Alyssa, small hesitations, fleeting glances, and an almost imperceptible tension when we were together. Then one rainy evening, she finally opened up in the quiet sanctuary of her penthouse. The words spilled from her lips slowly, carefully, as if each one carried the weight of a lifetime. "Eden, there's something I've been hiding. she began, her hands trembling slightly as they clutched the wine glass. My heart pounded, anticipating a confession, an admission of vulnerability. She spoke of her fortune not as a brag, but as a burden she had carried alone for years. The money, the wealth, the power. It had been hidden, carefully concealed so that no one would ever see her for her privilege before they knew her heart. She had wanted to be loved for who she was, not for the billions she controlled, not for the influence she wielded effortlessly. Every donation, every act of generosity had been her way of testing authenticity, of finding someone who could see beyond the glimmering surface. And I realized in that moment that the connection between us had been genuine, forged in shared values, empathy, and understanding, not in money or power. But then came the truth that cut deeper than any external obstacle. She had kept a secret even from me, an obligation, a commitment to her family and the symphony board, a set of ties that could never be severed without causing harm to countless others. No matter how much she wanted to be with me, no matter how strongly our hearts had intertwined, reality would not bend to desire. The weight of it pressed on both of us, a painful acknowledgement that love, even when genuine, sometimes collided with circumstances too vast to ignore. That night we sat together on her balcony, the city lights reflecting in her tear-filled eyes, holding hands but feeling the distance of insurmountable responsibility. She had hidden her billions to see if love was real, and in doing so revealed the profound depth of her heart. But that same act also revealed the unavoidable truth. Some hearts are fated to touch, to learn, and to part. Choosing purpose over desire. The following weeks were a study in restraint, longing, and quiet heroism. We spent stolen moments together, brief dinners and walks through the quiet city streets, but always under the shadow of her obligations and my reality. I continued my work at the animal shelter, pouring my heart into the lives that depended on me, while Alyssa balanced rehearsals, board meetings, and the invisible chains of privilege that defined her every move. In one particularly candid moment, she confided, "Eden, I've realized that what we had, what we still feel, cannot exist fully in the world we live in. Not yet." I felt the ache of unfulfilled desire, but I also understood the truth in her words. Love was not always about possession. Sometimes it was about courage, integrity, and the ability to let someone flourish without clinging to them. Our connection had inspired changes in both our lives. Her generosity touched lives I had only dreamed of helping, and my dedication reminded her of the simple, uncorrupted value of human connection. One evening, as the winter snow fell gently outside, we shared a final embrace before she returned to her responsibilities. Her hands lingered on my shoulders, her forehead resting against mine, her whisper soft yet resolute. "You taught me that love is more than wealth or power. It is action, it is heart. Never forget that." And as she walked away, disappearing into the glow of the city, I felt an unexpected clarity. The world had not allowed us to be lovers, but it had given us something perhaps more profound. A mutual recognition of purpose, a bond that transcended desire, and a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful love is the one that inspires growth, courage, and selflessness. That night, standing amid the quiet kennels of the shelter, I realized that life had a strange, beautiful way of teaching lessons. That love could be both transformative and ephemeral, and that true connection, even when fleeting, could illuminate the path for the rest of your life. The distance between us. The following days were heavy with absence. Alyssa returned to her world of rehearsals, gala events, and board obligations, while I remained anchored in the shelter, surrounded by the constant hum of life and need. Every time I walked through the kennels, I thought of her, the warmth of her touch, the clarity in her eyes, and the promise of something beautiful that the world had refused us. Yet in the distance, a lesson quietly emerged. Love was not about possession. It was about respect, admiration, and giving someone the space to fulfill their destiny. I threw myself into the work I had always loved, and in doing so, I found a profound satisfaction. Max, Luna, Whiskers, and the other rescues became not only my responsibility, but the living proof that compassion mattered more than circumstance, more than wealth, and more than the fleeting whims of attraction. Alyssa's generosity, even when hidden behind layers of wealth and power, had shown me a new way to approach life, not to wait for fortune, but to create impact in the moment. And so I rose earlier, planned carefully, and found joy in the little victories. The wag of a tail, a cat finally trusting a hand, a call from someone who had adopted an animal we had saved. These small, meaningful moments grounded me, teaching me that sometimes love is demonstrated not in presence, but in influence. The inspiration someone can leave in your life, shaping your purpose even from afar. The revelation of strength. One rainy afternoon, a package arrived at the shelter. I opened it to find a small, elegantly wrapped envelope with no sender but a simple note inside. Keep believing in the impact you make every day. You are seen. You are valued. My heart skipped. Though she remained distant, her influence was undeniable. It was a reminder that love did not always need to be immediate, physical, or possessive to leave an indelible mark on a life. I carried that note with me through every difficult day, from late-night feedings to emergency vet calls, and it became a talisman of strength and perseverance. In the following weeks, I realized that her hidden billions had never been about power over me. They were a test of authenticity, a search for someone who valued the world for its intrinsic worth, not the glimmer of wealth. In seeing me, in giving so generously to the shelter anonymously and publicly, she had proven that true love was selfless. And yet the bittersweet reality remained. We could never fully inhabit the same world. Her obligations, her legacy, and her responsibilities were too vast to share without compromising both our lives. And in that acceptance, a new strength was born inside me, a recognition that sometimes love is about letting go, about honoring someone's journey even when it diverges from your own. Impact beyond desire. Months passed. The shelter flourished in ways I could not have imagined, thanks in part to her quiet interventions and in part to the momentum her visit had given me. Volunteers increased, donations grew, and animals once destined for cold winters found warmth and safety. I watched the transformation of lives in front of me and understood the profound lesson Alyssa had unintentionally imparted. Love, when combined with purpose, creates impact far greater than mere romantic fulfillment. Her hidden wealth, once a secret, had become a catalyst, not for our union, but for my ability to change the world around me. And in every act of kindness, every animal saved, I felt her presence, not as a partner beside me, but as a force amplifying my own capacity for good. It was then that I truly understood that relationships are not always about being together in the conventional sense. Sometimes the greatest expressions of love are the ones that inspire growth, courage, and legacy in others, even from afar. I continued to carry her lessons in my heart: generosity without expectation, commitment to a cause beyond oneself, and the courage to act despite obstacles. Alyssa had hidden her billions to see if love could exist beyond wealth, and in doing so, she had gifted me a vision of purpose that would last a lifetime. The lesson of love. Winter melted into spring, and the shelter thrived like never before. As I watched the animals play in the sunlight, their joyous energy unburdened and free, I realized that love and purpose were often intertwined in unexpected ways. Alyssa and I never became lovers in the traditional sense. The shock of her secret and the obligations she carried meant that fate had designed our connection differently. Yet the bond we shared, one of recognition, respect, and transformative influence, was perhaps stronger than any conventional romance. I had learned that love is not measured by proximity, passion, or permanence. True love is measured by the courage it inspires, the lives it touches, and the way it leaves you changed. Alyssa had shown me that generosity, selflessness, and authenticity could create ripples far beyond personal desire. And in return, my dedication, compassion, and resilience had shown her that wealth alone could never define the depth of human connection. As I closed the shelter gates one evening, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, I whispered to myself, "Some loves are meant to inspire, not possess. Some bonds exist to teach, not to bind." And with that, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. Not because Alyssa remained in my arms, but because the lessons she left behind had shaped me into someone capable of changing the world, one rescued life at a time. A new challenge. Spring had barely begun when a new challenge emerged at the shelter. A series of unexpected health issues struck the older dogs, leaving me overwhelmed and exhausted. Max's limp worsened, Luna's puppies developed mysterious fevers, and donations, though generous, were unpredictable. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on my shoulders, yet I refused to falter. I worked long nights, tending to every animal, coordinating with volunteers, and making impossible decisions about who needed urgent care. Through it all, I found solace in the memory of Alyssa, her generosity, her recognition of my work, and the encouragement she had quietly given me. Her presence lingered in my mind like a guiding light, reminding me that true commitment required resilience, not just passion. One rainy evening, as I cleaned the kennels, I realized that love, like leadership, like purpose, was tested most in moments of difficulty. It was not measured by comfort or ease, but by the courage to endure, to act selflessly, and to make choices that mattered. That night, I vowed silently to every animal under my care that I would rise to meet every challenge, no matter how daunting, for they were not just lives. They were my responsibility, my purpose, my connection to something far larger than myself. An unexpected message. In the midst of the chaos, an envelope arrived at the shelter, sealed in a way that immediately caught my attention. Inside was a handwritten letter from Alyssa. Her words carried an urgency and warmth that made my heart ache and swell simultaneously. She wrote of her own struggles with expectations, the pressure to maintain appearances, and the weight of family obligations that had kept us apart. But she also reminded me of my strength, my courage, and the impact I had already made. She confessed that watching me navigate life with such unwavering determination had inspired her to make bolder choices in her world, to use her influence not just to perform or donate, but to actively make a difference where it was needed most. Her note ended with a single sentence that stayed with me long after I folded the paper. "The world may have kept us apart, but your heart has shown me what love truly means, without condition, without expectation, without fear." That message became my fuel in the coming weeks. I worked harder, organized more campaigns, and pushed the shelter to heights I had only imagined. Alyssa's hidden support reminded me that love could manifest in unseen ways, that influence could be both distant and deeply personal, and that true connection often transcended proximity. Recognition and reflection. Summer arrived, bringing with it recognition from the wider community. Local newspapers highlighted the shelter's extraordinary work, volunteers grew in number, and donors began to provide more consistent support. Yet amid the accolades, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The gala, the unexpected meeting with Alyssa, her generosity, and the challenges we had both faced. I realized that the lessons she had imparted went far beyond wealth or privilege. They were about authenticity, the courage to act despite fear, and the understanding that meaningful impact often came from unexpected partnerships and inspiration. In quiet moments, I would recall her eyes, her touch, and the honesty she had shown me, even when circumstances had demanded secrecy. That reflection brought not sorrow, but a profound sense of clarity. Life was about more than personal satisfaction or romantic fulfillment. It was about purpose, integrity, and the ripple effects of one's choices. And in that understanding, I felt an immense gratitude, not only for her influence but for the challenges that had shaped me into someone capable of true leadership and compassion. A temporary reunion. Autumn arrived with its golden hues, and with it, a temporary reunion that neither of us could have anticipated. Alyssa visited the shelter again, this time officially, attending a gala where we celebrated the expansion of our facilities and programs. There was an undeniable tension as we saw each other, a mixture of longing, respect, and unspoken emotion. But this time, the encounter was different. There was no uncertainty, no need for secrets. We shared a quiet moment behind the scenes, away from photographers and dignitaries. Her hand brushed mine briefly, and we spoke not of love or romance, but of purpose, growth, and the impact of our combined efforts. In her eyes, I saw admiration and pride, not just for the success of the shelter, but for the woman I had become. That fleeting connection reminded me that love could be enduring without being conventional, that admiration and respect could sustain a bond even when proximity was impossible. As we parted that evening, I felt a strange peace settle over me, a recognition that sometimes the greatest acts of love are those that allow someone to flourish independently, even when hearts remain intertwined. Legacy overlook. Winter returned, mirroring the first snowfall that had introduced us to one another, yet everything had changed. The shelter now stood as a testament to perseverance, dedication, and the quiet influence of generosity that had once come from a hidden source. I walked through the kennels, watching animals play, recover, and thrive, and I felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Alyssa's secret billions had never been about control or manipulation. They had been a challenge, a test of authenticity, and ultimately a catalyst for transformation. Though we had never become lovers in the conventional sense, our connection had shaped both of our lives in profound ways. I realized that love, in its truest form, is not always about possession, proximity, or fulfillment of desire. Sometimes it is about inspiration, courage, and the enduring impact one life can have on another. Standing among the rescued animals, I whispered a silent thank you to Alyssa, not for love returned, but for the lesson of love understood. And in that moment, I knew that our story, though unconventional and incomplete, had given both of us a legacy far greater than romance, a testament to resilience, purpose, and the extraordinary power of selfless connection. The unexpected challenge. The following spring, just as the shelter had begun to stabilize, an unexpected challenge arose that tested everything I had built. A sudden outbreak of illness swept through several animals, threatening their lives and overwhelming our limited medical resources. Volunteers worked tirelessly, but I realized quickly that determination alone would not be enough. I spent sleepless nights monitoring their conditions, consulting veterinarians, and juggling the logistics of emergency treatments. Amid the chaos, I felt the absence of Alyssa keenly, not just for her support, but for the calm reassurance she had always brought. Yet as the days passed, I found a surprising clarity. The skills she had inspired in me, the ability to remain composed under pressure, to act decisively, and to care deeply without expectation, were all tools I had cultivated myself. By the end of the week, we had stabilized the situation, saving every animal, but the experience left me changed. I had learned that crises, while frightening, reveal the true strength of character, and that the love and influence we carry in our hearts can guide us even in the absence of those we admire. A letter from the past. Late one evening, as I sorted through donations and supplies, I discovered a letter tucked inside a package from an anonymous benefactor. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it to reveal Alyssa's familiar handwriting. She wrote not of romance or longing, but of admiration, gratitude, and respect. She had watched from afar as I navigated the outbreak, had seen the strength I displayed in moments of fear, and wanted to ensure I understood the profound impact I had made on the world around me. She spoke of lessons she had learned through me about authenticity, courage, and the meaning of selfless action. Her words were not merely encouragement. They were a call to continue, a reminder that purpose often transcends desire, and that love can exist in its most profound form when it inspires growth and resilience. I felt tears sting my eyes as I read, understanding that the bond we shared had become something more than romance. It had become a shared legacy of courage and compassion that neither of us could ever fully erase. Mentorship and growth. With the shelter now thriving and my confidence growing, I began mentoring a group of young volunteers. Many were initially hesitant, unsure of how to navigate the challenges of caring for animals with limited resources. But I found that the lessons Alyssa had indirectly taught me, the patience to guide others, the understanding that leadership required empathy, and the courage to act without expectation of reward, were now tools I could pass on. Week after week, I watched these young volunteers blossom into compassionate, capable individuals, each inspired to create impact in their own ways. Their success reminded me that influence and love are often intertwined. One life can inspire another, and the legacy of compassion extends far beyond a single moment or relationship. Alyssa had shown me the power of generosity and subtle guidance, and now, in a different form, I was able to embody those lessons for others, creating a ripple effect that would outlast both of us. The conductor's return. One crisp autumn morning, the doorbell rang, and there she was, Alyssa, standing in the entrance of the shelter with her usual composed elegance, yet with a softness in her eyes that spoke of genuine emotion. This visit was not a gala, not a public display, but a quiet acknowledgement of what we had built and what we had taught each other. She walked among the animals, observing quietly, yet every gesture was filled with care and admiration. For a long while, we spoke not of love or longing, but of purpose and impact. She shared how my dedication had influenced her own charitable initiatives, prompting her to take risks and act more authentically in her world. In that moment, I realized that our bond had transcended traditional romance. It had become a mutual respect and inspiration that shaped both our lives. While we could not fully inhabit each other's worlds, we had created something enduring, a connection rooted in admiration, shared values, and the transformation of lives around us. Lessons in letting go. As winter approached, I reflected on the journey we had shared, the initial spark at the gala, the quiet dinners, the stolen moments, the trials, and the growth. I understood now that letting go was not a failure. It was an act of courage and love in itself. Love was not about possession or proximity. It was about impact, growth, and the ability to inspire positive change. Alyssa and I had never been conventional lovers, yet our connection had shaped our choices, strengthened our resolve, and allowed us to influence the world in ways we could not have imagined alone. Standing amid the warmth of the shelter, watching animals play, rest, and thrive, I recognized the profound truth that some loves exist not to be held, but to illuminate the path for others. It was a lesson I would carry forever, a quiet understanding that meaningful relationships often transcend the traditional boundaries of desire, transforming us in ways far more lasting than fleeting romance. A legacy of love and purpose. The years passed, and the shelter became more than a sanctuary. It became a symbol of resilience, compassion, and the unseen influence of two people whose paths had crossed briefly yet profoundly. Alyssa and I never returned to the romantic connection that had once stirred our hearts, but her impact on my life remained indelible. I had grown into a leader, a mentor, and a force of change, inspired by her generosity, her subtle guidance, and the lessons she had taught me about authenticity and selflessness. I often thought of the moment she had bid $100,000 at the gala, not for recognition or attention, but for the lives of the animals, and how that act had begun a journey that would transform both our worlds. Standing in the shelter one quiet evening, surrounded by the creatures whose lives had been saved, I whispered a quiet gratitude to her, not for love returned, but for the inspiration, courage, and purpose she had ignited in me. Some connections are not meant to be romantic. They are meant to shape, elevate, and endure. And in that truth, I found a love greater than desire, a bond beyond possession, and a life filled with meaning, purpose, and lasting impact. The shadow of the past. Despite the growth and stability of the shelter, the past had a way of creeping back into my life. One rainy evening, as I reviewed the records of newly arrived animals, a familiar name appeared on my phone screen: Terry. His call stirred memories I had hoped were buried, control, manipulation, and the insecurity that had once held me captive. Yet this time I answered calmly, with a sense of resolve that only years of experience and self-awareness could provide. He attempted to rekindle old tensions, to guilt and manipulate me into revisiting the past. But I had changed. The years of work at the shelter, the lessons learned from Alyssa's influence, and the understanding of what love truly meant had fortified my spirit. I realized that the love we aspire to hold is only meaningful when paired with strength, courage, and integrity. I ended the conversation with quiet authority, reaffirming that my path was my own and that the past no longer had power over me. In that moment, I truly understood that personal growth often emerges most vividly when confronted with shadows we thought were gone. A surge of inspiration. One afternoon, while tending to the shelter's newest arrivals, abandoned dogs and cats that bore the marks of neglect, I found myself reflecting on Alyssa's influence. She had taught me that even subtle acts of kindness could ripple through the world in ways neither of us could predict. Inspired, I launched a new initiative to provide educational workshops for local youth, teaching empathy, responsibility, and the impact of community service. The initiative was an immediate success, with children eager to participate, volunteers inspired by the newfound energy, and families moved by the dedication of our small team. It struck me then that purpose, fueled by love in its purest form, had the power to transcend limitations, to create systemic change, and to leave an indelible mark on the lives of others. In helping others find their voice and courage, I realized I was honoring the lessons of our connection, lessons about authenticity, compassion, and the quiet power of influence. Recognition beyond wealth. As the shelter continued to flourish, I received an invitation to speak at a prestigious community leadership conference. Standing before an audience of city leaders, philanthropists, and educators, I shared the story of our work, the struggles we had faced, and the lessons learned about love, purpose, and impact. I spoke openly about Alyssa's influence, not her wealth, but the way her actions had inspired me to push harder, to care more deeply, and to lead with integrity. The audience responded with awe and admiration, and several potential supporters approached me afterward, eager to help sustain and expand our mission. In that moment, I realized that true influence is measured not by status or wealth, but by the capacity to inspire action, to awaken empathy, and to create lasting change. Alyssa's hidden generosity had been a spark, but it was my dedication, courage, and authenticity that had transformed that spark into a blazing force capable of touching countless lives. A personal revelation. Late one night, after closing the shelter and ensuring every animal was safe and warm, I sat alone in the quiet of the office. The stillness allowed me to reflect deeply on the journey thus far, the challenges, the successes, the moments of doubt, and the rare glimmers of connection with Alyssa. I realized that love, in its most profound form, is not necessarily about romantic fulfillment. It is about recognition, inspiration, and the way someone's presence can change your life permanently. Alyssa had hidden her billions to see if love could exist beyond material wealth, but the real lesson had been mine to grasp. True love exists in support, in encouragement, in seeing someone's worth and nurturing it, even from a distance. I allowed myself a quiet smile, knowing that while our lives were separate, the bond we had formed would continue to influence me in every decision, every act of courage, and every moment of connection I fostered in my work and relationships. The shelter's expansion. Months later, the shelter celebrated its largest expansion to date. With the addition of new medical facilities, play areas, and foster programs, the organization had grown into a model of compassion and efficiency. Volunteers and staff worked tirelessly to ensure that every animal received care, attention, and love, while community members flocked to support the initiatives that had proven transformative. I found myself reflecting on how far we had come, realizing that the foundation of this success was not merely in financial support, but in the lessons of dedication, resilience, and selfless love that had been instilled through both personal struggle and Alyssa's quiet influence. The shelter had become more than a place of rescue. It had become a beacon of hope, an example of what could be achieved when love and purpose intersected, and a testament to the power of human empathy in creating lasting change. An unexpected reunion. One crisp autumn afternoon, I received a message from Alyssa, asking if she could visit the shelter. Her tone was casual but carried an unmistakable warmth. When she arrived, she walked among the animals, speaking softly to them, her eyes reflecting pride and admiration. We spoke at length about our journeys since our first meeting, sharing insights, challenges, and triumphs. There was no romance, no urgency, only mutual respect and acknowledgement of the ways we had changed each other's lives. She revealed how her work had shifted, inspired by what I had built at the shelter, and how she had learned to use her influence in more meaningful ways. In that moment, I understood that love is not always about union, but about transformation. Our bond had created impact, shaped lives, and inspired growth, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories are those that empower and elevate, rather than possess. The lesson of a lifetime. As the first snowfall of winter blanketed the city, I stood at the shelter, watching animals play and volunteers working with dedication and joy. I thought of Alyssa, of our connection, and of the lessons that had shaped my life. Some loves are fleeting, some connections are distant, but the most profound lessons are eternal. Love, I realized, is measured not by proximity or possession, but by courage, influence, and the ability to inspire growth and compassion in others. Alyssa had hidden her billions to see if love could exist beyond wealth, but the real gift was the understanding that true connection transcends desire, transforming lives and leaving legacies that endure far longer than any fleeting romance. Standing among the creatures whose lives I had saved, I whispered a quiet gratitude for the challenges, the lessons, and the love that had shown me the way. Life, I understood fully now, is less about what we hold and more about what we give, and in that truth, I found peace, purpose, and an enduring sense of fulfillment.